Prepositions are these little tiny words that can give you a lot of information in a sentence. And basically, a preposition is a word that shows time-space relationships between nouns or tells us the conditions under which something occurs or some verb happens. So some examples of prepositions are these little tiny words, right? About, after, at, on, to, until, down, beside, before, without, of, underneath, right? So little words are a ton more. You can find a lot of lists out there if you really want to know, but they're these little words that show us time, space relationships, or conditions where things happen. And the most important thing to learn for prepositions is the prepositional phrase. Prepositional phrase, they must be followed by nouns. They will not contain main verbs. If they contain main verbs, it's something else, and we'll see what that is in a second. So prepositional phrases, and the main thing again to remember with these is they're generally not going to contain the subject, and most of the time they're not going to contain the antecedent, which we haven't talked about yet. It has to do with pronouns, though sometimes that's not quite true. So basically, the main thing to know is they're not going to contain the subject. And in fact, you could omit them from a sentence, and you're not going to you may harm the meaning of the sentence, but you're not going to harm the main core of the grammar of it. Whereas if you omit the subject or if you omit the verb, you've just destroyed the sentence. Stuff like prepositional phrases and adjectives and things between commas, it's extra not essential information. Well, maybe not non-essential, but extra information that isn't part of the core of the sentence. It's kind of just extra added on stuff. So one of the ways to simplify a sentence is to get rid of stuff in prepositional phrases, and you can see the relationships between the important words like nouns, pronouns, and verbs much more easily. Let's look at some example of prepositional phrases. So I walked under the ladder near the side of the house. So we've got three prepositions in a row. We've got under, right? Shows where we walked, right? So it's acting as an adverb. Where did I walk? I walked under the ladder. Near is another one, so it shows where the ladder is. Well, it's near something. It's near, or the ladder is near the side of another preposition, the house. So again, three prepositional phrases in a row. They show us here, this one's acting as an adverb. These are acting as adjectives because they're modifying nouns. They're telling us something about the nouns, whereas this tells us something about our action, this verb. Sawyer took a shower after the basketball game. So again, another prepositional phrase, after the basketball game, shows us time, right? When something happened. So this again is acting as an adverb because it's affecting the took, right? When did I take the shower? I took it after the basketball game. He bought the house with his lottery winnings. So again, another prepositional phrase, with his lottery winnings, with being our preposition. So this shows us the manner by which something happened. How did something happen? Well, he bought the house with his lottery winnings. So again, acting as an adverb. Martha is at home. This shows us the condition that something or someone's in, right? So Martha is at home. So, right, shows conditions. So those are some examples about how prepositional phrases are used. Again, you could in theory omit those. You're going to have weird short sentences, but they're still going to be sentences, right? I walked. Sawyer took a shower. He bought the house. Even Martha is. Technically a sentence. Sounds a bit weird. Sounds a little philosophical, but it's technically a sentence. Right? If we eliminated the verbs or the subjects, the sentence falls apart. So just keep that in mind. It's extra information. While it may be important, it's not necessary to the core of the sentence. The other way prepositions can be used are as subordinators, and I'm going to say more about dependent clauses and that whole thing later, but basically they can be used with main verbs to create pieces of sentences that tell us some more information. So for example, after here is a preposition. After John left the house, he ran into his buddy Gregory. So notice it is telling us when something happened, so it is acting adverbially, it's acting like an adverb, but it's actually a clause, it's a part of a sentence. And again, we'll talk more about dependent clauses later. How about this one? Since the fall of the king, war has ravaged the land. Again, it's told us something about the events happening in this sentence, but it contained. Well, actually, this one is actually. I made a mistake here. This is actually a prepositional phrase. But anyway, how about this one? Mario saved the princess before he saved Luigi. Yeah, so before, this time it's at the end. But notice we have this preposition, and then we have this main verb. So it's a clause. So it's telling us something that tells us basically when Mario saved the princess, but it's not just a prepositional phrase because it's got this main verb. So that's the difference between a prepositional phrase and a subordinate or dependent clause starting with a preposition. These got main verbs. You know, if I could change this one, let me change this one. Since the king fell. There we go. Right, so now we've got a verb, fell. Now this would be a prepositional or subordinate clause, whereas before, since the fall of the king was a prepositional phrase because it didn't contain a main verb. So again, two uses for the preposition. We're going to see another way in which prepositions are used and actually how they appear as errors on the SAT in just a second. That has to do with idioms. But that's pretty much what you need to know for prepositions.